Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Morgan and I'm a PhD candidate in theater and performance studies. Today, with back to school season being here, I want to talk about a topic that is essential to all forms of learning, whether you are in high school, university, or you're just trying to grapple with the huge amounts of information in the world, and that is identifying and managing information effectively and responsibly. And specifically, I want to address this topic by discussing the Zettelkasten method and the sponsor of this video, which is a reference manager called PaperPile. We are right now living through the information age and an age of misinformation, and with the onset of AI technologies, it's getting harder and harder to tell fact from fiction on the internet and in our day-to-day lives. And as researchers, scholars, curious individuals, students, it's important that we're able to kind of critically assess what is true from what is false and understand the gray area in between. And I think that the Zettelkasten method of note-taking is actually a really effective way to help us do this. So for those unfamiliar, I have a bunch of videos about the Zettelkasten method on this channel, but Zettelkasten comes from the German word for slip box because the original users of this system would have a big box where they would put little slips of paper in it, and the goal was to put a single piece of information on a piece of paper. And then you would develop connections between all of the little pieces of information in your Zettelkasten so you understand the kind of lineage of knowledge, where ideas are coming from, and then importantly, the sources where you got that information from originally. So the goal of a Zettelkasten to me is to come up with your own knowledge because you are getting pieces of information from the world, connecting them together, and then extending from there into your own original thought. But where does that come from? It comes from sources that exist in the world already. And so the original Zettelkastens would have a separate slip box for the bibliography of this system. And this makes it possible to trace ideas back to their original sources. So the Zettelkasten doesn't just store information or aid you in the learning process, it does something much more powerful, which is to see where your original thoughts have emerged from an existing network of knowledge. And as you begin to make connections between ideas that come from disparate sources, you can identify where the gaps are, where new insights are emerging, and where some of those sources might be fallible. You can use a Zettelkasten to question assumptions and identify your own biases, and importantly, ensure that your information is accurate and well-founded. And that all starts with accurate documentation of where you got your ideas in the first place in that bibliographic slip box. Personally, I host my Zettelkasten digitally on my computer using the software Obsidian, and I have a folder in Obsidian for my source notes, but to effectively manage all of those source notes and ensure that I am correctly identifying which version of the source note I used to gather my information, because of course sometimes sources change when there's a new translation of a book, for instance, or there's an edit to a newspaper article. I actually use a separate software to manage my references, and in my case, I'm using the software PaperPile. So why do I need a separate place to store the sources of my knowledge? Well, first of all, citations in a creation, whether it be a piece of writing or a video, are when you identify where your information came from. And this is a cornerstone of academic work for three big reasons. First of all, citing your sources helps your readers identify where you got your knowledge, and this way they can validate what you're saying, so it gives you as a writer some legitimacy. And if they want to read further, they can actually use your sources as a way to get further information about a topic. It makes your work more transparent and trustworthy. Secondly, crediting others is respectful and ethical. It's just nice and good practice to thank people for the information that they have provided to you when you use that information, but also it's the law. In school, if you're using somebody else's information that isn't just general knowledge, even if you don't quote that person directly, you still have to cite them, otherwise you risk academic misconduct and plagiarism, which can get you kicked out of school. And thirdly, citing our sources in the works that we create develops this kind of research mindset. It helps us engage with sources more deeply, identify gaps in knowledge, and be sure that our own ideas are our own because we know where we got our ideas from. And this critical engagement with the sources that we're drawing from for our own knowledge is essential in combating misinformation. So why do I specifically need a reference manager as opposed to just, say, keeping track of the sources I use in my Obsidian alongside the notes where I'm putting ideas that I got from the sources? Well, in school, as I said, you need to cite every single source that you use when you're using it in a paper. And when I used to do this for class, I was writing maybe 10 to 20 page long papers, and I would manually enter every single single citation, and then I would manually write up a works cited list or bibliography at the end of my paper. And these papers were only up to like 20 pages long, so doing that citation process after I was done writing, it didn't take that long, and I have a strong attention to detail, so I don't think I made too many mistakes, but of course I can't check except with my own eyes. But now I am writing a PhD dissertation, and my dissertation has to be over 200 pages long, and it could potentially have hundreds of citations in it. And that is way too much for my brain to handle, and I don't want to spend the final days of writing my PhD just painstakingly going through the grueling process of trying to manage all of those references. And that is where a reference manager comes in. A reference manager is going to store those sources for you so that they are searchable and accurate, and a good reference manager is also going to let you annotate PDFs directly inside of it so that you have the quotes and notes that you're making on those sources directly in your reference manager. There are several options out there. I've talked about Zotero before, but there's also Mendeley and EndNote, which I haven't used those two, and the one that I'm using, which is also the sponsor of this video, PaperPile. The reason that I really like PaperPile is twofold. First of all, it's super user-friendly and intuitive. It's got a beautiful, clean interface that I didn't even have to watch any instructional videos to understand. And then secondly, it keeps all of my research materials in one place, from finding those research materials to making notes on those research materials. So there's actually a search bar in PaperPile where I can look up sources without having to go to an external place like my university's library or Google Scholar to look for solid sources. And then it has a PDF viewer that you can annotate directly in the app. And you can export those annotations to pull them into somewhere like Obsidian, which is what I do. What's more, PaperPile was founded by 3 researchers in computational biology, so they really understand the needs of students, and they are listening to the needs of their users and updating PaperPile accordingly. If you want to try PaperPile for yourself, PaperPile has kindly offered my viewers a discount code so you can get 20% off a 1-year PaperPile personal subscription. This offer is valid for 3 months after this video releases, and you can use the code Morgan20 at checkout. So let's actually go into PaperPile now so that I can demonstrate for you why you need a reference manager if you are a student at any level of the education system. Welcome into my PaperPile library, where I am going to demonstrate for you the capabilities of a reference manager and try to demonstrate all of its unique functionality that requires you to use a reference manager alongside your Zettelkasten if you are writing anything. And even if you're not writing anything, it's still good practice to hang on to all of the metadata that a reference manager can hold for you. So this is the main area of PaperPile, my library of references, but when you start using something like PaperPile, this space is going to be empty. So the first thing you're going to want to do is add references to your manager. In PaperPile, the way that you do that is very easy. You go to the upper left-hand corner and click on Add. The first way you might want to add references to PaperPile would be to import them from other programs like EndNote or Zotero. This is what I did, bringing in my old references from Zotero into PaperPile very easily. But if you're starting from absolute scratch, then I would say the easiest and fastest way to put references into PaperPile would be just to search online. And this is the way that I find new sources the most often. PaperPile will search the internet for you, and if it finds a reference that it already has PDF access to, it's going to automatically include the PDF alongside the reference in your library. So this is very handy because it means I don't have to go to an external site like Google Scholar or my school's library to find a source. And one of my favorite scholars is Bruno Latour. So I'm gonna look and see if they have any articles by Latour I might want to read in the future. And of course, a lot of them show up. So let me just scroll through and see if there's anything I want to read. And I think that Is There an Ant at the beginning of anthropology sounds pretty interesting. My field, performance studies, emerges partially out of anthropology, so this could be potentially interesting to me. All I need to do now is click Add, and it's in my library. If once you've got your reference into your library, you need to change anything about it, to see all of the metadata associated with an entry in your library, you just click on those 3 little dots and you can actually see how much PaperPile grabbed from the internet for me. And if there's anything I want to change, I can click on the 3 dots to the right of the title of the piece and click edit. One thing that would be good practice to add in here if you are doing any academic writing would be to add a field for the short title of the work that you're referencing, because is there an ant at the beginning of Anthropology? A few responses to the subject matter of the collection is a really long title, and if I need to cite the title itself in my in-text citations, which I do sometimes in MLA formatting, the formatting style that I use, then I want a shortened version of that title to reference instead. And I'm going to make this short version maybe just "Is there an ant?" And I'll click save. So now if I'm citing this text and need to refer to the title, it's going to use that shortened title instead of the really long one. Another Bruno Latour text that I've already read, but I read as a book, so I don't want to grab something off of the internet for this because this is a physical thing, and I want to make sure that the reference I have in my library is specifically this book in this translation in this edition. I'm going to click search online again, but this time I'm going to type in the ISBN of the book, which I can find in the front matter, and when I type that in, it's going to find specifically this book. So we'll click on books, and then once I've typed in the ISBN, the only thing that comes up is this book, Down to Earth by Bruno Latour. So we'll click add. There is one more way that I want to show you that you can add sources to your library, and that is on the internet itself. So if you're on a web page, like say the Wikipedia page for Bruno Latour, and you want to cite specifically this web page, so you need to bring it into your reference manager, instead of going and searching for it in the PaperPile web app, you can also get the PaperPile Chrome extension, and that's going to appear in the upper right hand corner. It's a P with a little arrow next to it. You'll see that I also have the Zotero Chrome extension here, so this is a common tool among reference managers. But if I just click on the P, PaperPile is going to recognize this website and its metadata, and then I can just click Save to PaperPile and it will appear in my library. If I also want to add this Wikipedia page to any specific organizational structure I have going on in my reference manager, I can do that here automatically as well. So let's say that a Wikipedia page is in my general comprehensive exams list, which it wouldn't be because comprehensive exams are something that PhD students do in like their second year, and you would not include a reading from Wikipedia, but let's just pretend. I'll just click on general list, and that's a folder. You might want to create folders for different projects you're doing, like your exams or a class that you're in, etc. And then let's also go ahead and add it to one of my labels, and a label is something you might want to use for the different topics that are found within your reference manager to make your sources easier to search. And Bruno Latour writes on climate justice and within the environmental humanities, so let's stick him inside that label. And now I will click Save to PaperPile, and you'll see that now the P has a little green check mark next to it instead of the arrow, and PaperPile is going to remember every time I go onto this site that it's already in my PaperPile, so I'm not going to risk duplicating it. Let's go back to PaperPile then. And you can see right at the top is the Bruno Latour entry in Wikipedia, and it's attached to the label Climate Justice, and it's in the folder General List. And if I go into General List, I'll see it here. If I go into my label for Climate Justice, I'll see it there. You can, of course, always create a new reference for in your reference manager just by manually typing something in, and that might be useful for sources that you cannot find on the internet, like interviews that you yourself conducted, for instance, but I don't typically use the manual entry because PaperPile is pretty good at finding any source I might want. So now my references are in my reference manager, but I don't want to fall into the collector's fallacy, which I'm sure Tuttlecast users are familiar with, and just collect a bunch of sources without ever reading them. So I'm going to go ahead and actually read one of these sources now, because PaperPile can store PDFs directly in here and let me annotate them. So I'm going to find a Bruno Latour article that I'm interested in reading, and I can easily search for all of the articles by Latour by typing in author, and then Latour's name. So now it's showing me only things that are authored by Latour. And it looks like I have a PDF attached for On Actor Network Theory by Latour. So I'll click on that. It opens in a new browser tab, and you can see that I've made some comments on this. I've highlighted some things, and all of these annotations that I've made appear on the left-hand side of my screen. There are other annotation functionalities, like I can add shapes, or I can actually just draw on the page. I can type on the page, but most of the time I use highlighting and comments. And these little stickies I can drop wherever I need to. Once I've read the paper, I've annotated it, I can export my annotations by going to the bottom of the annotations section and clicking export. I can export these as this beautiful prepared PDF, and I'll just note here that PaperPile has even managed to read the page number that my highlights are on. So when I put these quotes into my Obsidian, which is what I tend to do, it's actually going to have the page number attached. You can also export as a markdown file and a variety of other things that might be useful for you. So now I have stored and read and annotated my sources all within my reference manager, but now I actually need to write my paper where I'm going to reference these sources. And personally, I'm writing my dissertation in Microsoft Word, and there is PaperPile Word integration. So let's hop over to Microsoft Word and I'll show you how that works. Here is a Word document that is a draft for an article I was writing for Circus Talk, an online circus publication, which you can check out the final version at Circus Talk. This was just a draft, but it's one where I reference Bruno Latour, and I actually have a quote from him. And this quote is from We Have Never Been Modern by Latour on page 137. I typed this in manually, and you can tell because if I scroll to the bottom, there's nothing in my works cited list about Bruno Latour's text. But if I use PaperPile to add this citation, it's automatically updating my works cited list. So let's remove this citation. And instead, I'm going to leave my cursor where I want the citation, but I'm going to go to the top menu and click on PaperPile. In the PaperPile tab, you'll see a button that says Add or Edit Citation. So I'll just click on that, and a window is going to pop up where I can search in my PaperPile library. So let's search for Latour. And the one that I'm looking for is We Have Never Been Modern. There it is. I am just going to click on it. And I've already told PaperPile that I'm using MLA9 as my formatting language, but I need to give it a bit more information for it to accurately cite this source. Specifically, I need to include the page number. So this was on page 137. And now I'm just going to insert the citation. And there it is. And importantly, if I now scroll down to my works cited list, I automatically have Bruno Latour's We Have Never Been Modern in the works cited. And I didn't have to do anything to get it there. So that was very easy, but of course MLA and other formatting styles can get very complicated, and that's where the power of a reference manager really comes in. So let's take this second example where I've cited Latour again down at the bottom of this paragraph. And the important thing to note here is that I'm citing Latour not from We Have Never Been Modern, but rather from his article on actor network theory. So let's remove this manually inserted citation and instead again, add or edit a citation from PaperPile. We're going to look for On Actor Network Theory. Let's search by the title of the piece this time. Here is the source that I want to cite, and again, I'm going to use the drop-down to add the page number. This was on page 369 of the article that we just annotated. And the thing is that in this sentence, I've actually used Latour's name, so I don't need to use Latour's name again in the citation. So I'm actually going to click suppress author because I need to communicate to PaperPile that I've referenced Latour already and we don't need to do it again in the citation. So this time when I click insert citation, Latour's name is not present, but in its place is the words On Actor Network. And if you think back to when we put that first reference into PaperPile by Latour, we created a short title for it. This is exactly the instance where that short title is necessary because I have now cited Latour twice from two different titles. So I need to find another way to differentiate between these citations, and the way that MLA does that is by including a shortened version of the title of the specific piece I'm citing from. So I need to add the words on Actor Network in quotations to clarify that it's this work by Latour and not We Have Never Been Modern. And you'll see that my previous citation that used to just say Latour 137 now says Latour We Have Never 137. And I didn't need to tell PaperPile to update that other citation. It did it automatically. And again, if I scroll down to the bottom of the paper, you'll see that I now have both pieces in my works cited. And maybe I need to go into PaperPile to edit the name of this journal and some other information that didn't quite make it into PaperPile correctly. And if I do that, all I have to do is click Update Citations and Bibliography when I get back into Word, and PaperPile is again going to automatically update all of the citations to better reflect the new changes that I made in my PaperPile library in the web app. So you don't have to be concerned about changing your citations partway through writing your paper, which is just such a relief. So that is the most basic functionality of a reference manager, specifically PaperPile, which is the reference manager I'm using to format all of the citations of my dissertation. And this video is also very kindly sponsored by PaperPile, so thank you to them for supporting this channel. And they've also given you a 20% off discount for a 1-year subscription to PaperPile using the discount code Morgan20 at checkout, and you can access that using the link in my description box below. That is not an affiliate link, that's just a gift to you from PaperPile. I hope that now, if you already had a Zettelkasten in whatever format, you see the value of having a reference manager on top of your Zettelkasten. And I hope that if you're a student that wasn't using a reference manager previously, you're now considering using a reference manager for your studies because it's going to make your life so much easier. I've loved working with PaperPile, so if you want more in-depth videos about MLA style or how to organize your reference manager or other videos like that, then let me know and I'll see about partnering with them again. Regardless, happy back to school season, everybody. I took a bit of a break in August, but I hope to come out with a few more videos again soon. So I'll see you in another video again soon. Bye, everybody.